Hey guys, tonight we begin with the gentle rustle of morning, just before the market awakens. The sky over Judea is still deep blue, tinged with rose near the hills. A few stars cling to the edge of the dawn, but they're fading, making way for the sun that's just about to rise. You are walking with Jesus through the still sleeping town, sandals brushing over stone, the air still cool against your skin. The clay buildings stand quiet, their shadows long, their walls catching hints of light as the world begins to stir. You might just wish you could stay here forever. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're listening from and what time it is. Love seeing this little family of peace spread across the world. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's walk beside Jesus tonight, slowly and quietly. A rooster calls somewhere far off, its echo rolling over rooftops and courtyards. You hear it before you see anything else. Then a window creaks, a door shifts. A woman hums as she lifts the heavy cover of a bread oven, checking for heat with the back of her hand. The scent of yesterday's ash and today's hope mixes in the still air. You and Jesus move softly through the winding streets, neither speaking, not yet. The cobbles beneath your feet are warm in places where embers smoldered overnight near open hut. Everywhere else, the stone is chilled, kissed by the long breath of night. The town is built on a rise, its narrow lanes curving like the folds of a woven basket. Clay jars lean in alcoves by doorways, stacked 2 by 2. A few still hold the last of the cool water from yesterday's well. You pause and rest your hand on one of them. The clay is cool, a little damp. You think of all the mornings it stood there silent and solid, waiting to be useful. Jesus watches a cat leap from one rooftop to another, landing soundlessly on the hard clay. He smiles a little, then glances at a shutter swaying gently in the breeze. The shutter creaks as if remembering something. Mainstream historical fact. In 1st century Judea, most homes were constructed with flat rooftops and thick mud brick walls, offering insulation against the day's heat and a place to sleep under the stars during warm nights. Mornings were the most active hours before heat slowed the body and blurred the air. Jesus slows his steps at the corner where the baker's shop will open. It isn't open yet. The door is still latched with a wooden peg, but inside you hear movement. Someone is kneading dough, pressing and folding with slow, practiced rhythm. You smell yeast and flour and the smoke from kindling just catching fire. A child darts across a lane ahead, barefoot and laughing quietly, a fig in one hand. The sound echoes off the stone like water from a shallow pool. You and Jesus keep walking. You notice small details now. A broom propped against a wall, an herb bundle hung to dry from a wooden beam, the worn threshold of a neighbor's door polished by years of steps. The village has not fully woken, but it breathes beneath its stillness. A quirky cultural detail. In many Judean villages, early risers often greeted one another with simple, almost whispered blessings, not full conversation, but gestures and nods, sometimes even just the laying of a hand over the heart. The morning belonged to quiet, to preparation, to intention. Jesus stops near the steps of a stone house and kneels to adjust his sandal strap. You stand beside him, noticing how the sun begins to gild the edge of the town wall. Light creeps like honey over stone. Not long now, Jesus says softly, looking out toward the market square still hidden behind buildings. You nod. Historians still wonder whether this slowness, this sacred, unhurried, Nochi Singh was learned in these small towns, shaped by rhythms of light and silence. Not everything Jesus taught came in parables. Some came in pace, in pause, in present. You move again, and as you do, the first clear call of a vendor rings out across the rooftops. Dates, fresh dates from the hills. And so the day begins. The voice of the date vendor echoes like a soft bell down the winding streets, tugging open shutters and stirring sleepy feet. You and Jesus round the bend toward the marketplace, where the square has begun to awaken. Clay pots clink gently as they're moved into rows. Baskets are unwrapped to reveal figs still glistening with morning dew, and a pair of goats tied to a post nibble lazily at straw. The sky is now fully lit, the golden edge of the sun cresting the town's eastern slope. Vendors crouch beside their goods, arranging lentils by color and onions by size, shaking out woven cloths to dust them clean. Children carry bundles of herbs, trailing smells of mint and oregano. Someone pours olive oil into a lamp. The flame flickers to life. Though it's no longer needed, the sun has claimed the sky. Jesus greets a potter, the man's tunic streaked with clay. "Your hands are already at work," he says gently. The potter laughs. They never stopped. He's been shaping jars since before the birds sang, smoothing the rims with fingertips and care. Mainstream historical fact. In Judean towns, marketplaces opened at first light and often centered around public squares near the well. Goods included not only food, but tools, dyes, linens, and pottery. Many potters worked adjacent to their stalls, so buyers could request specific shapes or designs and watch them made. You watch as Jesus kneels beside one of the potter's shelves. He picks up a small jar glazed, slightly uneven, still warm. He turns it slowly in his hands. "This one will hold something sacred," he says. The potter chuckles. "It'll hold pickled onions, most likely." Jesus smiles, but doesn't correct him. Nearby, a woman sets down a basket of eggs and adjusts the woven strap across her shoulder. Another ties bunches of garlic together with thick thread dyed marigold. You catch the scent of cumin, clay dust, sheep's wool, and warm bredel of it, blending into something earthy and full. A donkey ambles past, led by a boy no older than 10. The animal carries sacks of barley on either flank. They seem straining slightly from the weight. The boy nods respectfully to Jesus as they pass, and Jesus returns the gesture, then ruffles the donkey's ear. "Steady footing," he says, as if offering a blessing, a quirky cultural detail. It was common for boys in Judean towns to learn trade routes by leading pack animals from household to market. By the time they turned 13, many knew the weight of barley, the sound of ripe figs, and the best times to barter for bread. The two of you continue to the well at the far end of the square. A woman is drawing water with slow, careful pulls of the rope, her arms strong, her gaze steady. She nods at Jesus and offers a cup, carved from olive wood and smoothed by use. He drinks, then passes it to you. The water is cool, slightly sweet with the taste of stone and thyme. "Good clay in the hills this season," the woman says, glancing toward the potter's stall. He says, "It holds better." Jesus nods. Clay remembers the hands that shaped it. She smiles. "Then mine must be forgetful. My jars all leak." Historians still wonder how much everyday banter shaped Jesus' stories. Did parables of jars and vessels, wineskins and wells, arise not from sermons, but from small conversations in the dust of morning? You sit beside the well for a while, watching the square fill. There's no rush. People move with practiced ease, like dancers tracing steps they've known all their lives. Even the noise is soft voices lowered, as if not to disturb the sky. Jesus takes a seat beside a stall selling thread and cloth. He runs his fingers over a bolt of deep teal linen, then a pale saffron wool. He doesn't buy anything. He only feels, measures, considers. You begin to recognize faces now. The woman with the laughing baby. The man who always forgets his coin and always remembers a story instead. The boy who drops apples and blames the ground. This is a market not just for goods, but for presence. Jesus speaks to no crowd, delivers no sermon. He is simply here, moving, noticing, touching life as it unfolds. You feel the sun warming your shoulders, the dust gathering at the hem of your robe. You feel the jar in your hands, still warm from the potter's shelf. You feel the morning settle into your chest like a prayer. And in the clatter of amphorae laughter and coins, in the light on fresh figs, and the hush of the well's rope unwinding, you realize something. Holiness doesn't always arrive in miracles. Sometimes it arrives in morning. You rise with Jesus and step back into the marketplace flow. The rhythm of the morning has deepened, now more voices, more motion, but still that same steady hum. You follow the edge of the square toward a quieter side where older vendors spread goods on woven mats. These are not the stalls of bright fruit or steaming bread. These are slower things. Spindles, wax, scraps of carved bone, bundles of salt tied in cloth. Jesus kneels beside an elderly man arranging lengths of cord. His fingers move with the care of someone who has done this 1,000 times. His knuckles gnarled like olive wood. He doesn't look up when he says, "This one holds a mule. This one holds a door." Jesus picks up a piece and tests its strength with a slight pull. "And this one?" he asks. The man smiles without turning. "That one holds memory." Mainstream historical fact. Rope and cord were handmade from flax, goat hair, or palm fibers, and used in nearly every corner of daily life. Cord making was both a skill and a story-rich twist, preserving labor, need, and time. A few steps away, a woman sits with a bundle of reeds. Her hands move quickly, weaving them into a tight mat. A child watches her silently, mimicking each twist and fold with invisible thread. Jesus pauses, crouches beside the child, and hands her one of the cords. "For your first basket," he says. You walk on, passing a booth of jars painted with blue ash lines and delicate swirls. A vendor offers slivers of dried fig on a flat stone. Another sings softly to her goat as she brushes its fur with a worn comb. The world here is stitched together by small tasks, long hands, quiet repetition. Jesus stops beside a basket filled with cracked clay pieces. The vendor, a young man with soot on his sleeves, explains that they're fragments from misfired pots. Some have been reshaped into oil lamp covers, others ground into powder for future mixing. Nothing is wasted. A quirky cultural detail. Many young potters repurposed broken shards into useful objects or traded them to brickmakers, believing that even failed clay had its place. The broken pieces were called whispers, for the sound they made when poured together into baskets. Jesus picks up one fragment, runs his thumb across its uneven edge, then places it back with reverences, if the break was part of the design. You make your way toward a small booth draped with cloth to protect it from the rising sun. Beneath it, a man mends a torn leather sandal with a thin bone needle. His work is slow, but confident. "These souls have crossed 3 towns, he tells Jesus, holding up the worn shoe. "Still more to go." Jesus nods. The road remembers. They say no more, but you notice the way both men look at the stitching, like it binds something more than leather. Historians still wonder whether Jesus ever apprenticed beyond carpentry. Some suggest he may have learned from traveling craftsmen, menders, weavers, potters who shaped not just goods, but ideas. If so, these market mornings may have been his earliest classrooms. You glance up. The sun has climbed high now, casting short shadows. The square glows, heat gathering gently in the stones. A jug tips at the well and splashes cool water. Someone laughs. Someone sings. At the edge of the marketplace, a fig vendor fans herself with a scrap of palm and waves you over. "He passed by here yesterday," she tells Jesus. "Said my figs were too ripe." Jesus grins. "They're perfect today." She beams, handing you each a small one. You bite in. It's honey sweet and soft, with seeds that crunch just slightly. You eat slowly, letting it fill you. There's no rush. The two of you sit down on the edge of the low well wall, figs in hand. The chatter of the marketplace continues like a river behind you, but it feels far away. Jesus says, "What we build with our hands stays with us longer than we think." You nod, the warmth of the fig still on your tongue. You look down at your own palms, dusted with flour, clay, rope, fibrous traces of this day, this market, this moment. The jar from earlier still rests at your side. You lift it now, and for the first time, it feels like more than an object. It feels like a story waiting to be filled. Jesus doesn't say anything more, but he doesn't need to. The square continues its motion, and you sit beside him, wrapped in the gentle hum of a faithful town. The market begins to thin slightly as the heat A few vendors start to draw cloth over their wares, shielding fruit and fabric from the strengthening sun. But not everyone is ready to close. You and Jesus move slowly toward the east end of the square, where another kind of trade continues, not of goods, but of stories. An older woman with a crooked back and sharp eyes sits on a low stool, her hands shelling lentils into a worn wooden bowl. Children cluster around her knees, whispering and giggling. She doesn't chase them off. Instead, she nods at Jesus and gestures to the spot beside her. He sits. "You do too." Without pause, she begins. "It was the year the well nearly dried," she says. "We had to walk past Tamer's Hill for water, and that's when the jars started to crack." Mainstream historical fact. Judean communities often relied on communal wells that could drop dangerously low during dry seasons. Families sometimes traveled to neighboring towns or hillside springs, bringing back water in clay jars, balanced on shoulder poles. She taps the rim of her bowl with a rhythm, keeping time with her words. As she tells the tale, she passes around small items from the folds of her shawl, dried berries, a bead, a feather, all symbols of her story. The children watch with wide eyes, Jesus listens closely, nodding at each turn, sometimes echoing her phrases under his breath like a second melody. You look around. Others have gathered, young men, older women, a toddler, chewing on a fig leaf. The square is quieter now, but somehow even the pigeons under the awning seem to still their wings. The woman pauses, letting her fingers trail through the lentils. We mended the jars with wax and string, held for a while, but it taught us to carry less and return more often. Jesus smiles. Some things are meant to break. She nods, not in agreement, but in understanding. You'll glance down and realize your jar is still at your side, dusty and warm. You tap its surface gently, solid, whole, for now. A quirky cultural detail. Some Judeans kept small charms or herbs in their water jars, believing it helped purify the contents or bring blessing to those who drank. Others etched family marks into the clay, passing vessels down like heirlooms. A boy asks Jesus a question. Did you ever drop a jar? Jesus looks at him. Yes, I cried harder than the jar broke. The boy laughs. So do the others. Even the woman lets out a rusty chuckle. Historians still wonder about Jesus' childhood, which paths he walked between home and the well, which elders he listened to. No scrolls record the boy with cracked hands and sore feet, but perhaps stories like this are the closest we'll come. The wind shifts slightly, bringing the scent of rosemary and stone. Jesus rises, brushing lentils from his sash. The woman waves him off with a flick of her fingers. You remember better than you speak, she mutters. He bows anyway. You follow as he walks through a narrow side lane, the walls so close, your elbows nearly brush both sides. You hear someone sweeping behind one of the door's short, brisk strokes of a bundled broom. A jug leans at the base of a doorway, wrapped in cloth to keep it cool. Beside it, a line of figs dries on a palm frond. A cat eyes them lazily. You pause and ask, do you ever forget these places? Jesus looks back. Not the places, sometimes the names, never the faces. The lane opens into a small courtyard. A fig tree leans over the wall, its trunk twisted and strong. Beneath it, a woman kneads dough in a wide bowl set low on the ground. Her arms move in circles, push, fold, turn, rest. Her breath matches her rhythm. She looks up, back already. Jesus only gestures toward you, as if to say, your turn now. You kneel beside the bowl. The woman nods once and hands you the dough. It sticks at first, cool, rough, springy. Your fingers learn its memory. You push, fold, turn, rest, again. Jesus watches, then kneels beside you and dips his fingers into a small jar of oil. He sprinkles a few drops into the bowl and nods for you to continue. The scent of the oil rises green and sharp, like crushed leaves. Mainstream historical fact. Bread was a daily staple in Judea, made fresh every morning. Families kneaded early, let dough rise in the warmth of sunlit courtyards, and baked in shared ovens. Olive oil was precious, often stored in tightly sealed clay jars to preserve its sharpness. The woman hums softly, the same kind of tune you heard the night before, half lullaby, half prayer. It drifts up into the leaves above. Jesus leans back, eyes closed. For a long moment, no one speaks, and that silence speaks everything. The dough rests now, tucked beneath a woven cloth and set aside on a low stone shelf. The woman wipes her hands on her apron ochre-stained linen with edges fraying from years of use. She stretches her back, then gestures for you and Jesus to follow her around the side of the courtyard. A narrow staircase hugs the outer wall, leading to the flat roof above. You climb carefully, one step at a time, your sandals tapping against the clay-packed stone. When you reach the top, the view opens wide. Nazareth lies quiet below, rooftops scattered like folded linen, some dotted with herbs drying on red mats, others holding baskets weighted with stones. The rising sun casts long gold bands across the village, glinting off ceramic bowls, bronze hinges, and sleepy goats beginning to stir. Jesus moves to the edge and crouches, fingers brushing the dew-darkened surface of the roof. Cool before the fire, he says quietly. Mainstream historical fact. In many Judean homes, flat rooftops served as vital spaces used for drying grain, cooling baked loaves, or sleeping under stars in the heat of summer. Early mornings often saw neighbors exchanging news or prayers from adjacent roofs. A door creaks below, and you see another woman step into the courtyard carrying a clay jar. large and full. She steadies it against her hip and walks with deliberate balance across the open square, her pace calm but confident. She's heading to the ovens. Jesus says, standing beside you now. Her family bakes early for the travelers. Down a short slope, smoke begins to curl from a shared baking dome. It's opening dark with rising ash. A low song rises with it, faint and rhythmic, like kneading turned into music. A quirky cultural detail. In some villages, communal ovens were lit before dawn. The first woman to arrive brought kindling and often shared scraps of dough with others acquired, offering to neighbors and strangers alike. It was said the best bread bore no name, only warmth. You sit on the warm clay, legs crossed, the breeze lifting the edge of your tunic. Jesus remains standing, hands on his hips, gaze fixed on the smoke trail rising against the blue sky. You smell that? He asks. You nod. It's the scent of wood and yeast and promise. Sometimes, he says, the smell is enough to bring someone home. You think of travelers, merchants with dusty cloaks, shepherds returning from hills, boys with new sandals scuffed from long roadsall, drawn back not by call or command, but by something familiar and unseen. Historians still wonder how Jesus' metaphors of bread, rising, sharing, and breaking were shaped by scenes like this, everyday acts that carried the weight of the sacred without declaring it. A dog barks somewhere beyond the rooftops, followed by the low call of a rooster. The village is waking now, each sound another thread in the woven cloth of mourning. You close your eyes for a moment, letting it all rise inside you, the smell of baking, the warmth beneath your palms, the gentle hush of presence. Jesus breaks the quiet. Come, there's a boy who carves jars. He's just over that ridge. You follow him back down the stairs and through a series of alleyways, turning at earthen corners, stepping over a cracked sill and brushing past a vine heavy with green pods. The ground softens, here less stone, more dust. Near the edge of town, under a simple awning of palm fronds and wool, a boy no older than 12 sits with a chisel and a lump of red clay. His tongue peeks out in concentration as he chips carefully along the curve of a nearly finished jar. Jesus kneels beside him and says nothing. The boy glances up, then back down. Too dry, he mutters, but the shape's still good. Jesus smiles. Keep it breathing. A jar's just a lung until it holds water. You crouch nearby, watching. The boy dips his fingers into a small bowl and flicks water across the clay, softening its edges, easing the lines. Mainstream historical fact. Children in Galilean towns often learned trades early. Pottery, especially jarmarken, was common, as each household required vessels for water, grain, oil, and incense. Some families carved subtle symbols onto the bases to distinguish their work. The boy shows you his mark, a tiny triangle etched near the lip of the jar. So they know it came from here, he says, so it's not just a pot. A quirky cultural detail. Some families believed carving even a simple mark on their jar made it less likely to crack in the kill. Whether superstition or truth, the habit endured for generations. The boy pauses, clay dust on his fingers, and looks at Jesus. Do you make things too? Jesus glances at you before answering, not always with clay, and then he stands, touching the jar's rim lightly. Carry it carefully, he says. I always do, the boy replies. You rise again, the sun now higher, casting short shadows beneath each doorway. You feel thirsty, and without needing to ask, Jesus reaches into a shaded corner, uncovers a small jug left cooling in damp cloth, and hands it to you. You drink. The water tastes of earth and patience. You hand the jug back, its surface still cool against your palms. Jesus nods once and places it back beneath the cloth with quiet care, then leads you farther down the dusty path, past a cluster of fig trees and toward a small cluster of stalls rising along the town's edge. It's not a market day, not officially, but already a few merchants have begun setting up. Woven awnings sag from wooden poles, their faded stripes fluttering in the morning breeze. Baskets of lentils, olives, and chickpeas rest on rough mats, and a few clay flasks of wine glint in the angled light. A girl about your age stands behind one table, carefully stacking small jars each, corked with fig leaves and sealed with beeswax. She smiles when she sees Jesus and offers him a sample. He lifts one jar, uncorks it, and sniffs. Karab honey, he says, eyebrows raised in appreciation. The girl grins. From my uncle's grove, The bees there are quieter. Mainstream historical fact. In 1st century Judea, honey was gathered not only from wild hives, but also from kept bees that nested in clay tubes or woven baskets. Carob honey, made from the pod's nectar, was prized for its richness and shelf life. Jesus takes a taste, offers you the jar. You do the same. It's thick and unexpectedly bitter at first, then settles into something deeply sweet. He nods slowly. The girl offers you a second jar, this one with tiny pickled onions, pale and floating like moons in brine. Jesus chuckles and takes it. The woman beside her sells woven belts and small bundles of herbs. Mint, hyssop, wild thyme. A few coins trade hands with barely a word. A quirky cultural detail. Market stalls often followed invisible rules. Everyone knew who set up where, who bartered loud, and who preferred silence, who sold quickly, and who welcomed long stories. It wasn't written down, it just was. You move slowly, hands behind your back, careful not to knock over any baskets. Jesus trails a few steps behind now, letting you take the lead. A boy calls out to you from under a canopy of dyed linen, holding a cracked wooden yoke fitted for balancing water jars across shoulders. "Trade you for your belt," he says brightly. You shake your head, laughing. He shrugs and tries the next passerby. Jesus finally catches up beside a fruit seller's stall. Pomegranates spill from a split basket, their insides glistening like rubies. He picks one up, weighs it in his hand, and speaks softly. "They always remind me of the temple curtains, heavy, red, full of promise." You blink at the thought, then look again at the fruit. It does carry a kind of sacred weight. Historians still wonder whether some of Jesus's imagery, figs and vines, seed and soil, was more than metaphor. Was it meant? Could a fruit carry a truth too large for scrolls? A bell chimes faintly in the distance, signaling that the main gate has opened for the day. Merchants straighten. Dust stirs. A donkey brays behind a curtained alley. Jesus glances at the rising light. "Let's see what Tame is shaping today," he says. You follow him down a narrower path, where the market's chatter fades into quiet work, sounds wood scraping, a pot clinking, breath drawn before striking clay. Tamo's workshop is small but tidy. Shelves line the walls, each holding vessels in different stages, some raw and soft, some half-dried and chalky, others glazed and glinting. She greets Jesus with a brief smile and a smear of ochre across her cheek. "Your timing's always suspicious," she says, gesturing at her hands, dripping with slip. "I follow the smell of good clay," Jesus answers, brushing dust from his sleeves. You walk carefully inside, feeling the floor give slightly underfoot. The walls are dark from smoke, but in one corner a shaft of light lands on a single finished jug, a masterpiece of curves and careful symmetry. Tamar catches your gaze. "That one's mine," she says, then pauses. "I mean, it's for me, not for trade." Mainstream historical fact. Most potters in Judea sold nearly all they made, but keeping one fine piece for oneself was not uncommon, a marker of pride or memory, a wedding gift saved, or a future hope. You run your fingers near but not touching the vessel's surface. The glaze shimmers like still water. Tamar nods at your restraint. "Good hands," she says. Jesus moves toward the wheel, where a fresh lump of clay waits. He doesn't sit, doesn't touch, just watches. "You ever shape one?" Tamar asks. Jesus smiles. "Only hearts," he says, and she laughs full and loud, like a bell-breaking morning stillness. A quirky cultural detail. Some believe that pots shaped with laughter inside them would never break, even under heat. Whether true or not, jokes were often shared while forming clay. The room grows warm from the fire pit tucked into the rear. Someone places more kindling. The flames leap, casting dancing shadows along the wall, each one tall and flickering like ghosts in celebration. You sit on a low stool, letting the heat settle into your bones. And then silence. Not awkward, not empty, just still. Jesus sits across from you, elbows on knees, gazing at the spinning wheel. "You can tell what someone carries," he says, "by how they shape the soft things." You nod, not entirely sure what he means. But maybe that's all right. The warmth of Tamar's workshop clings to your skin as you step outside again, blinking against the morning light. The market's soft din still hums behind you, but here on the side path, it feels like a different world, quieter, slower, more tender. Jesus walks ahead again, but only by a little. The road curves gently toward a low wall of sun-baked stone. Beyond it, a communal baking area comes into view. Simple clay domes set on flat ground, blackened at the edges where soot has layered over years of fire. A handful of women gather there, their sleeves rolled and headscarves tied snugly. One fans coals with a woven palm leaf. Another shaves dough into rounds and lays them onto wide flat stones, letting the heat kiss the surface until it bubbles and browns. One woman waves you over, hungry already. She teases. Jesus grins. Always, if the bread's warm. She hands you each a piece still steaming, soft at the center, edges crisp. You bite in. The flavor is deep, almost smoky, laced with herbs. Mainstream historical fact. Bread in ancient Judea was most often unleavened, or only lightly leavened, baked quickly in communal ovens. Families would bring their own prepared dough to the fire pits, and bakers kept the flames hot from dawn until midday. You watch the rhythm of it all the way the women move in practiced harmony, turning, patting, brushing flour from their skirts. Each motion seems to carry both purpose and care, as if every round loaf holds a story and every scorch mark a memory. Jesus squats near one of the ovens, talking with an older woman whose arms are dusted white. Her laugh is low and kind, like a drum softened by years. Still shaping bread with that crooked wrist? He asks gently. She holds it up, wrist slightly bent but fingers nimble. Doesn't stop the taste, she replies. He chuckles. I remember when you let me knead the dough once, and you oversalted it. You said it kept better. A quirky cultural detail. Some believed that too little salt offended the bread's spirit. Too much made the loaf stubborn. Children were taught to whisper prayers into the DOA while kneading words of gratitude or simple hopes for good weather. You sit near the edge, knees tucked up, watching a child help his mother by brushing flour off the finished loaves. His nose is streaked white, and he beams with pride each time he completes the task. The sky is climbing higher now, and the scent of bread mingles with the sharp attempts of ashes and time. Jesus leans back on his hands, eyes half closed, letting the warmth of the fire wash over him. You ask softly, do you ever miss it? These kinds of mornings. He doesn't open his eyes. They never leave me, he says. You nod, chewing slowly. Historians still wonder whether Jesus' metaphors about bread the leaven, the crumbs, the sharon sprang not from sermons, but from hours spent exactly like this, watching hands stretch dough and feed the hungry, seeing how a single loaf passed between friends becomes more than food. The coals shift with a hiss. One of the younger women hums a tune you don't recognize. The others join in, wordless but in harmony, like birds rising on the same wind. Jesus dips a bit of bread into olive oil from a small clay saucer. He offers it to you, then takes his own. The taste is simple flour, fire, and oil, but it settles in your chest like something holy. The older baker stands and dusts her apron. That's the last of mine, she says. Jesus rises with her. Thank you. She gestures toward a half-wrapped bundle near the wall. Take it, she says, for whoever you meet next. He does. You leave the baking yard behind, your fingers still oily from the bread, the warmth trailing you like the scent of rosemary. The alley you pass through now is narrow, walls on either side blooming with pots of herbs. Wild mint tumbles from one. Another holds lavender gone dry but still fragrant. Who plants all these, you ask? Neighbors. Jesus says they grow what the sun allows. A pause. You can tell a lot about a place by what it lets grow. A quirky cultural detail. In some Galilean towns, people left bits of root or seed in cracks between stones, trusting that even the smallest place could become fertile. If it took, it was considered a blessing not just for the home, but for the whole block. You reach the edge of a courtyard shaded by linen stretched across beams. A few elders sit there, passing a jug of watered wine and talking quietly. Their voices drift and fold, never rising too loud, like waves curling back into the sea. Jesus doesn't speak now. He simply sits again, beside you, placing the wrapped bread gently on a stone beside him. You sit too, your back against a cool wall. Birds chirp from the roof above. One flutters down, pecking near a fallen crumb, and then the moment stills. Nothing more is said, but somehow everything is heard. A breeze sways the linen overhead, casting patterned shadows across the courtyard floor. The elders' voices continue, a soft murmur, like reeds brushing in shallow water. You recognize fragments of their conversation. news of a cousin's new calf, a neighbor's daughter engaged, the price of barley. Jesus listens, head tilted slightly, but doesn't speak. His hands rest quietly on his knees, open, easy. You reach for the wrapped bread beside him, fingers brushing the warm cloth. It's still soft, still fragrant, and you wonder who will eat it next, whose hunger will meet this gift without ever knowing the name of the baker. One of the elders nods in greeting, back from the market. Then, he asks. Jesus smiles. With more than I left with, they chuckle. One raises his cup in salute. Isn't that always your way? Mainstream historical fact. In first century Judean villages, it was common to spend mornings in public spaces like courtyards or shaded walls. These spots functioned as informal gathering places, courts of advice, and resting points for both laborers and one. A younger man enters the courtyard, face flushed from exertion. He carries a clay jug, arms braced tightly around it. The elders fall quiet as he sets it down near a low platform and kneels. It cracked, he says breathlessly. I carried it the whole way, but it cracked at the rim. One of the older men waves him over. Let's see it. They examine the jug carefully. A fine hairline fracture traces its neck, barely visible, but dangerous. One slip, and it would shatter. Jesus leans in and runs a finger along the crack. It held this far, he says. The young man nods, ashamed. But it won't hold again. You don't know that, Jesus replies. He gestures to the shaded edge of the courtyard, where jars wait in orderly roast tall ones for oil, broad ones for grain, squat ones for herbs. Every shape has a purpose. Every crack once mended, a quirky cultural detail. Some Judeans used a mixture of ash, sap, and finely ground stone to patch cracked vessels. These mended jars were not thrown out. They were often passed to family members with the blessing, "May what's inside never break you." The elder taps the side of the jug with a knuckle. A low tone hums from it. "Still strong," he says. "Maybe stronger for the journey." Jesus smiles. You think of your own days, your own wear, your own invisible fractures. The way some mornings feel too fragile to carry, yet somehow you do. Historians still wonder if the images Jesus used, the wineskins, the vessels, the leavened bowls, were born from watching scenes like this, where a jar becomes more than clay, and a crack becomes a testament instead of a flaw. The elders shift, rising slowly. One gathers the empty cups, another stretches his back with a groan and a laugh. The sun now slants at a different angle, warming the walls. A soft smell of coriander and lentil wafts from a home nearby. Jesus stands, brushing flour from his hem. "Come," he says gently. "Let's walk before the day grows too hot." You leave the courtyard behind, back through the alley of herb pots, past a child chasing a goat with a stick no bigger than his arm. At a fork in the road, a water seller stands near a large amphora, dipping ladles for a few customers. He wears a blue sash, and his sandals are cracked at the heels. Jesus greets him by name. The man laughs. "I saved the cooler ladle for you." He offers you each a scoop clear, cold water with a faint taste of clay. You drink slowly, letting it rinse your mouth, your thoughts, your weariness. Mainstream historical fact. In Judean towns, water sellers served a vital role, especially during dry seasons. They drew from cisterns or carried large jugs uphill, offering drink in exchange for coin or a favor, or sometimes just a kind word. Jesus thanks him with a hand on the shoulder. The man bows slightly, then turns to fill another cup. You and Jesus walk on, bellies full of bread and water, silence stretching between you like shade. You pass a woman weaving near her doorway, sunlight lighting the threads in her lap, gold ochre and russet twining together. She nods politely. Jesus pauses. "It's the same pattern my mother used," he murmurs. She smiles. "Old as the hills," she says. He reaches to touch the edge of the cloth, fingers grazing its surface like reading memory. You keep walking. The quiet settles in again, but it's not the kind that asks for words. It's the kind that rests behind your eyes, in your chest, in your hands. The wrapped bread still rides under your arm. You haven't forgotten it. You won't, and neither will whoever receives it next. The road curves toward a grove of fig and olive trees, their leaves whispering softly overhead. The light here filters through the branches in flickers and shafts, warm but dappled like sunlight softened by time. You and Jesus walk this path without urgency, your feet tracing steps carved by centuries. The earth beneath you feels firm and worn. compacted by sandals and hooves and bare soles over generations. Ahead, a small clearing opens where a group of children play with pebbles and sticks. They've drawn lines in the dust, creating a maze or perhaps a field, something with rules that only they seem to understand. Their laughter rings high and bright, catching on the breeze like the flutter of linen on a line. Jesus stops at the edge of the clearing and watches, arms folded loosely across his chest. One boy spots him and waves, triumphant. I beat Tavi. Jesus grins. Did you play fair? The boy nods. Mostly. The others laugh. Mainstream historical fact. In Judean towns, children's games were simple and often mimicked adult life-building pretend granaries, imitating shepherds, or acting out market scenes. These games helped teach roles, expectations, and shared rhythms of the village. One girl kneels to stack pebbles into a tiny tower. Another hums a song under her breath, a lullaby you remember from your own childhood, the kind that follows you like a scent or a shadow. Jesus kneels too, careful not to disturb the dust-drawn patterns. He picks up a small round stone and rolls it between his fingers. Some say stones can remember, he says quietly. The children pause. Remember what? Asks the boy, now sitting cross-legged. The games, the prayers, the way your feet moved. Jesus replies, everything leaves a trace. The boy looks down at the earth, then stomps his foot with purpose. Did that leave a trace? Jesus smiles. More than you think. A quirky cultural detail. In some Galilean communities, parents believed children's laughter had protective power. It was common to invite children to speak blessings or make joyful noise before long journeys or planting seasons, to call the favor of heaven. The game resumes. One of the children hands Jesus a fig. It's small and still firm, not quite ripe, but offered with sincerity. He accepts it with a slight bow and tucks it into the fold of his sash. You and he continue walking, and the sounds of play recede behind you like a dream dissolving into morning. Beyond the grove lies a narrow bridge, a simple plank spanning a shallow stream. The water is low, a trickle over smooth stones, but cool and clear. You pause to kneel and scoop a handful, splashing your face. It smells of moss and sun. Jesus crouches at the edge, watching a water skimmer flit across the surface. Even now, the stream knows where to go, he murmurs. You sit beside him, toes brushing water. Historians still wonder whether Jesus' metaphors, the living water, the flowing truth, the clean heart, grew from such quiet scenes. Did he learn to speak of life like water because he saw how it shaped everything without forcing anything? He reaches into the stream and retrieves a piece of broken pottery caught between two stones. It's just a shard, but you can still see the painted curve of a vine, a remnant of some long ago jar. It was useful once, you say. It still is, he replies. It carried oil, maybe wine. Now it shows us how long beauty can last. He sets it on a rock in the sun and stands. A gentle breeze shifts the fig leaves overhead. You continue up a small rise, the path narrowing again. A woman walks ahead of you, balancing a broad basket on her head. Inside, herbs, a clay bowl, and something wrapped in linen. Jesus calls out a greeting. She turns slightly. I saw you at the market. He nods. And you were bargaining well. She laughs. My mother taught me never to overpay for onions. She slows to let you catch up. As you walk together, she says, I'm bringing food to my brother. His foot's still bad from the field. Jesus nods. Tamar's son. The woman looks surprised. You remember? Of course, he says simply. Mainstream historical fact. In village life, family injuries were everyone's concern. It was common for relatives or neighbors to deliver food, help with labor, or simply sit and share stories as a way of carrying burdens together. The woman veers off down a side path, waving goodbye. You and Jesus continue upward, the village now behind you, just rooftops and wisps of smoke below. From here, the hills stretch out in quiet folds. Dry grass, olive rows, sun-warmed rock. You sit together on a flat out. Jesus places the fig on the stone beside him. A moment passes. Then he says, I once heard someone say figs bloom backward. The fruit comes first, then the flowers. You frown. Is that true? He shrugs. Maybe. Maybe it's just how some things grow, hidden first, then seen. The fig glows softly in the sun. You wonder when it will ripen. The fig rests on the warm stone beside you, a small promise waiting to ripen. Around you, the wind brushes gently through the olive branches, and the sound is like distant rain, though the sky is a steady pale blue. Jesus leans back on his palms, legs stretched out before him, looking toward the horizon without speaking. You follow his gaze and see the faint shimmer of another village far off, tucked between low hills. The road there is barely visible, just a soft line where the land parts like a folding cloth. You ask him, "Have you been to all of them, these villages?" He tilts his head slightly. "Not yet, but they all feel familiar." A shepherd passes behind you on the slope, guiding a few lean sheep with a quiet hiss and a slender branch. One of the sheep pauses to sniff at your sandal before moving on. The shepherd nods to Jesus but doesn't stop, just keeps walking, like he's following the rhythm of the land. Mainstream historical fact: shepherding in 1st century Judea was a common and respected, though often solitary, profession. Shepherds were known for their ability to read weather, terrain, and the moods of their flocks with near invisible precision. They often led the animals from memory, not maps. You watch the flock move over the rise and disappear. Jesus speaks again. "A shepherd told me once that sheep don't really follow the voice, they follow the calm." You turn to him. "The calm." He nods. They know when someone is at peace. They trust that. There's silence again, but it feels full, not empty. Down the slope to your right, a line of clay jars rests along the wall of a house. Some are sealed with wax, others are open, showing grain, water, or dark olives floating in brine. A woman and her daughter are brushing dust from them with lengths of woven cloth. Jesus gestures toward them. "Do you want to help?" You nod. Together, you make your way down the slope, and the women glance up as you approach. The mother smiles and hands you a cloth. "Watch the rim stay chip easily," she says. You begin to wipe gently, watching the sun catch the curved edges of the vessels. Each one is different, some smooth, some rough, some patched with new clay where a crack once threatened to ruin them. But they've all lasted. The daughter hums as she works, a steady rhythm that matches the movement of her hands. Jesus says, "These jars have seen more than some people." The woman laughs. "More than me, for sure." A quirky cultural detail. Many Judean families had specific jars passed down through generations, each one named. It wasn't uncommon for a jar to be known as Lila's olive keeper or grandfather's water gift. In this way, the containers themselves became vessels of memory. You brush dust from the last rim and look at Jesus. His fingers trail over the side of a jar patched with deep ochre clay. "Mended, but strong," he says. Then he lifts it slightly to test the weight. Still holds. He sets it down with care. Historians still wonder whether the reverence Jesus held for daily tools lamps. Basker's jazu is shaped by his early years as a carpenter, where even a cracked board could find purpose again in skilled hands. Did he learn to see the sacred in the used, the patched, the ordinary? Perhaps you step back and view the row of jars in the sunlight. They look like sentinels, silent and still, but somehow watching. The daughter holds out a small bowl of honeyed barley to you both. "For your help," she says. You thank her and take a bite. It's sticky, sweet, and gritty in a way that feels ancient. Jesus eats slowly, savoring it, like he does with everything. The mother waves you off with a smile as you start walking again. This time down toward the market, street wider now. More people, more sound. Clay pots stacked, bread cooling on woven mats, baskets of herbs tied with twine. You pause to watch a man ladle lentil stew into shallow bowls. The scent wraps around you, earthy rich, with notes of cumin and something like roasted garlic. Jesus lingers by a stall where scrolls are being copied in careful brown ink. The scribe looks up and nods, but doesn't speak. Mainstream historical fact. In towns with synagogues, trained scribes often worked in market-adjacent spaces where passers-by could request copies of prayers, genealogies, or business records. The scrolls were precious, and the ink was often mixed with vinegar and soot. You trace the edge of the stall and feel how smooth the wood has become from decades of elbows and fingertips. The scribe gently folds a scrap of finished parchment and tucks it into a cloth satchel. Jesus steps back and walks beside you again. You say nothing, but he knows. It's a lot to sounds, the smells, the closeness of people, and yet none of it feels rushed. Not with him beside you. A boy runs past chasing a chicken. The bird squawks. The boy laughs. And an older woman nearby mutters, "That bird has more sense than the whole family." You smile. Jesus does too. And just like that, The market becomes a place of joy, not just trade. The two of you step into a shady spot beneath a fig awning, the day now stretching toward its brightest point. From here, you can still hear the laughter of the boy, the scolding of the woman, the scrape of a spoon on the bottom of a jar. All of it real, all of it sacred. You remain beneath the fig awning a while longer, the shade pooling at your feet, dappling your arms in soft shifting patterns. Jesus stands beside you, his hand resting lightly against the wooden post that supports the awning. From where you are, the marketplace feels like a living current, voices eddying, footsteps crossing, the clink of pottery, the low thrum of a flute played somewhere just out of sight. A group of women passes, their baskets full of dates and flatbread wrapped in linen. One offers a fig to Jesus, and he accepts it with a quiet word of thanks. He hands it to you, and the fruit is warm from the sun, its skin slightly split. You break it open carefully, the red pulp inside glistening like ruby. Jesus says nothing, just watches as you take a bite. Mainstream historical fact. Figs were a dietary staple in Judean, fresh, dried, or pressed into cakes. Farmers often dried them on rooftops or flat stones, turning them in the sun until they reached a chewy, dense sweetness. They were also traded in markets, especially during festival times. You chew slowly, the texture grainy, the flavor rich and earthy, the sweetness coats your tongue. A man haggles with a spice merchant nearby, arguing over the worth of cumin seeds. Another sets out a clay tray of small carved idols, household figures shaped from local stone. Jesus looks but does not speak. He moves again, walking slowly past a tanner's stall, where stretched hides hang in various stages of curing. The smell is strong, sour, and rand. Most passers-by wrinkle their noses, but Jesus pauses, greeting the tanner by name. Still wrestling with the goatskins, he asks, with a soft smile. The tanner laughs. Oh, they never forgive you, these ones. Jesus nods, but they keep the water out. The to share a look of understanding, and then the moment you wonder how he knows so many of them, not just names, but trades, temperaments, troubles. It's as though he's walked these roads more than once, not just as a visitor, but as a neighbor. A quirky cultural detail. In small Judean towns, tradespeople often passed their skills down through 3 or more generations. It wasn't uncommon to find a baker whose family had worked with flour and fire for 100 years, or a potter shaping clay on the very wheel his grandfather built. Jesus turns into a narrower lane off the main square. You follow, the sound of the marketplace fading behind. The lane is quiet and cool, the sun broken by overhead cloths stretched from wall to wall. A woman sits cross-legged by her doorstep, sorting lentils from pebbles with a smooth rhythm. A young boy sits beside her, mimicking her motions with serious concentration. Jesus crouches beside them. The woman looks up, and her face softens. Will he learn patience, you think? She asks, nodding toward the boy. Jesus watches for a moment, then says he already knows the rhythm. The patience will follow. The woman smiles and returns to her task. You keep walking, the lane opening again onto another small square, this one quieter than the last. A few elders sit beneath a fig tree, their hands resting on canes, heads bowed in conversation. One lifts his eyes as you pass and raises 2 fingers in greeting. Jesus returns the gesture respectfully. Historians still wonder how much of Jesus' wisdom was shaped, not in wilderness or temple, but in places like these shaded lanes, shared courtyards, slow afternoons where people didn't teach with scrolls, but with stories and silence. The sun now hovers just past its peak. A clay jar sweats on a nearby ledge, water darkening the fabric tied around its neck to keep the contents cool. You reach for it and Jesus nods. Go ahead. The water is cold and sharp against your tongue. You pass it to him, and he drinks too, the thread of water trailing down his wrist. He wipes it away with the edge of his sleeve. Down the next path, a pair of boys kicks a wrapped ball of cloth between them, shouting with glee. One of them trips and falls with a cry. You move instinctively, but Jesus is already kneeling beside him, checking for injury. The boy has scraped his palm, nothing serious. Jesus looks him in the eye and says, "It'll hurt for a while. Then it'll remind you not to fall that way again." The boy nods solemnly. Jesus rips a small piece from the hem of his own sash and ties it gently around the boy's hand. The child flexes his fingers and beams. Then they're off again, laughter echoing behind them. A quirky cultural detail. In many families, Children were taught how to make their own cloth toys or patched balls using worn tunics and animal sinew. These toys often became treasured possessions and were passed between siblings with pride. You continue walking, the streets slowly quieting again as the market hours begin to close. A vendor pulls down her awning. Another sweeps lentil husks into a small pile. A flock of sparrows lands near a broken jar and pecks at the remnants of grain. Jesus watches the birds for a long time. You ask, "What are you thinking?" He replies, "They never worry, but they still find enough." You nod, not needing more than that. The lane curves again, back toward the outskirts of town. You recognize the dusty road from earlier, the one where you first spotted the row of clay jars drying in the sun. They're gone now, likely filled and stored or sold. The space is empty, except for one crack at the rim left behind. Jesus walks to it, touches the side. Even cracked, it holds something. He says. He doesn't elaborate. But you understand. The path winds gently away from the heart of the village, and you follow it alongside Jesus, the light mellowing into that golden hush that comes just before the late afternoon. Dust rises softly beneath your steps, stirred by the quiet breeze that carries with it the scent of thyme and sun-warmed earth. You pass a fig tree whose branches sag under the weight of nearly ripe fruit. A boy perched in its crook calls down to Jesus, his face sticky with juice. "I saved the sweet ones," he calls. Jesus grins and reaches up. The boy tosses one down imperfect, bruised on one side, and Jesus catches it without effort. He bites it, slowly, thoughtfully, as if it was something more than fruit. Mainstream historical fact. Fig trees were symbols of prosperity and blessing in Judean culture. Families often planted them close to home, pruning them carefully to allow both shade and easy harvest. The shade of a fig tree was a common place for teaching, storytelling, and prayer. You keep moving. A donkey stands tethered outside a small home, its bridle resting on a wooden peg in the wall. A woman nearby tends to her courtyard oven, the coals inside still glowing faintly. The smell of barley bread drifts toward you, smoky, dense, familiar. She waves to Jesus, then beckons you both forward. "Still warm," she says, pulling a loaf from the edge of the fire and wrapping it in woven cloth. "It's not much, it's more than enough," Jesus replies, accepting it with a bow of his head. He tears the loaf in three and hands you a portion. It's rough and nutty, the crust hard, but the warmth of it sits softly in your hand, a quirky cultural detail. In many Galilean households, it was considered impolite to let someone pass your gate without offering bread, even if the visitor was a stranger. Women baked in outdoor ovens shaped from clay and straw, often passed down and rebuilt over generations. You sit beside the low courtyard wall, sharing the bread in silence. The woman returns to her fire, humming under her breath, the rhythm of her work practiced and slow. A clay jar sits beside her, and she dips a cloth into it now and then, wiping her hands clean. Jesus watches her quietly. "Hands, remember," he says. You look at him. He continues, even when the mind forgets. They shape, press, fold, stir, and they keep on doing so, even in sorrow. You think of your own hands, what they've carried, what they've held. You rise again and continue together, the village beginning to fall behind. A low wall marks the end of the last courtyard, and beyond it lie open fields, peppered with olive trees and wild grasses. The breeze picks up slightly, stirring the hem of your tunic. Jesus steps off the path briefly, crouching beside a patch of herbs nestled at the base of an old stone. He breaks off a sprig and offers it to you. "Marjoram," he says. "We used to rub it between our fingers before meals, just for the scent." You breathe it in sharp, green earth. Historians still wonder about the private rituals that filled Jesus' early years. Not the recorded teachings, but the quiet gestures, the way he salted his bread, where he chose to rest on long walks, which herbs he gathered from the hills. So much of that world was made of little things, now long forgotten. You move forward again, passing a girl leading the goats by a twisted rope. One goat stops to nibble at a thistle, and she tugs gently, patient but practiced. She looks at Jesus and smiles shyly. He nods. Her sandals flap softly as she walks on. The sun lowers a little more, bathing the rocks ahead in warm ochre light. You'll climb a gentle rise and pause at the top. Below, another cluster of clay homes sits nestled between groves of pomegranate and almond trees. A line of laundry dances between two rooftop stunics in shades of russet, cream, and indigo. You and Jesus sit on a low stone ledge, your bread finished, your hands dusted with crumbs. You ask, did you always know this place would mean something? That your walking would become stories? He doesn't answer right away. Then he says, I only knew I couldn't stay silent forever. He picks up a flat stone and turns it in his palm. There were always stories waiting, even in the stones. You watch a shepherd dog trot across the far field, circling its flock. A whistle carries faintly on the wind. The sheep move as one, their bodies forming a river of white and beige against the green. Jesus follows the motion with his eyes. He says, see how they follow not, because they're driven, but because they know the sound. A quirky cultural detail. In first-century Judea, shepherds often trained their flocks to recognize a personal whistle or specific syllable. Some even sang to their sheep at dusk, guiding them with the rise and fall of melody rather than commands. You close your eyes and listen. The hush of grass, the bleat of sheep, the call of a shepherd, the quiet breath of one who walks beside you. You stay until the sun touches the edge of the horizon, and then you rise. The day is not yet over, but it has softened. You begin the descent toward the pomegranate groves, each footstep slower now. Jesus walks a few paces ahead. The bread has settled in your stomach like warmth, and still, the story continues. The slope beneath your feet is gentle but layered with loose gravel, so your steps are careful. The grove welcomes you with low branches and dappled shade, the kind that flickers and shifts like candlelight across the path. Pomegranate trees, knotted and ancient, line both sides, their leaves dark and waxy, their fruit swelling in their skins, still green but beginning to blush toward ripeness. Jesus reaches up and touches one of the heavier branches, his fingers brushing a nearby blossom. Not long now, he murmurs. You walk slower here. The scent in the air is faintly floral, with an undercurrent of dust and bark. A soft rustling nearby reveals a pair of children gathering wind-fallen fruit into a rough cloth sack. One child stops and peers at Jesus. He kneels and offers the child a seed pod from the path. For planting, he says gently, or for keeping. Some things do both. The child cradles it like a treasure, nodding solemnly, and then runs back to the sack. Mainstream historical fact. In many Galilean villages, children were responsible for collecting fallen produce figs, pomegranates, almonds either to use or sell in the markets. Even from young ages, their labor was part of the household rhythm. You and Jesus continue until the grove gives way to open space. Before you lies a large stone cistern, its lip low and rounded with age. A woman stands beside it, lowering a rope-bound jar into the water below. Her sleeves are rolled to the elbow, her headscarf tied neatly behind her neck. She glances up as you approach and nods without speaking. Jesus steps forward and helps her draw the rope upward. The jar rises slowly, darkened with moisture. He sets it on the stone rim, water sloshing gently inside. The woman offers him a cup carved from gourd, which he accepts and hands to you first. The water is cool, tasting faintly of limestone and something green, perhaps moss or memory. The woman says quietly, "It's better in the morning, but it'll do." A quirky cultural detail. In places where water was drawn communally, early morning was considered best when the water was clearest and the air was still. Many women built friendships in those twilight hours, trading news and silence before the day's labor began. Jesus hands the cup back and thanks her. She nods again, adjusts her rope, and begins lowering the jar for another draw. You sit on the edge of the cistern, resting your legs and feeling the faint cool rising from the stone. Across from you, a flat plain stretches toward the horizon, dusted with new shoots and weeds. A single goat grazes there, tethered to a low bush. Jesus is quiet for a time. Then he says, "This cistern my uncle helped build it, long ago." You glance at him, surprised. He adds, "He said water should be held with reverence, not just stored, but remembered." Historians still wonder how many of Jesus' parables were shaped by family sayings and forgotten conversations. We think of them as eternal truths, but maybe they were once common wisdom shared over firelight or at the edge of a cistern, passed from uncle to nephew, father to son. You both stand again and follow a path that curves around the water's edge. It leads toward another cluster of homes, simpler than before. These structures lean into one another like old friends, their walls marked by age and repair-mended cracks, smoke stains, finger-width indentations where jars were set down day after day. Near the entrance to one home, A woman sits grinding barley in a stone quern. Her body sways with the rhythm, steady and practiced. A toddler plays nearby, dragging a broken wooden spoon through the dust. He looks up at Jesus and beams. Jesus crouches beside the child and draws a small spiral in the dust with his finger. "Do you know what this is?" he asks softly. The boy giggles and copies the shape, crooked and bold. You watch the scene unfold like a tiny painting, hands in dust, barley scent in the air, sun slanting through olive wood beams. The woman looks up. "He's learning," she says. Half apology, half pride. Jesus nods. That's all any of us are doing. You press your fingers into the edge of a worn brick and feel its texture crumbly in places, smooth in others. A breeze lifts the edge of your robe. Somewhere behind you, a bird sings once and then falls silent. You and Jesus rise and keep walking, your footsteps in sync. The sun is beginning to slant low, gilding the tops of the homes in that light afternoon way, where light stretches everything longer, quieter. You reach a small courtyard where an older man sits, weaving a reed basket. His hands are knotted with age, but deft. He works without looking up, but his voice carries. "I remember you," he says to Jesus. "You fixed my wall years ago." Jesus smiles. It's still standing. Mostly, the man chuckles. "Better than my knees." He holds up the basket. "Half finished. Takes longer now," Jesus replies, "but it holds more." You can't tell whether he means the basket or the man. A quirky cultural detail. Elders in many Judean towns were prized for the rhythm of their hands, whether weaving, baking, stitching, or carving. Their pace might slow, but the depth of their memory often meant fewer mistakes and more meaning in every motion. You sit for a while, watching the weave of red against red, over and under, tight and loose, repetition without haste. Jesus says nothing more, but his eyes stay on the basket, following its pattern as though reading a scripture written in fiber and time. When you rise again, your legs are stiff from stillness, but your breath feels deeper. The shadows stretch a little longer. The path home is not far now, and still, the day holds its softness. You turn a corner and the street narrows, hemmed in by clay brick walls, dappled with age and sunlight. The breeze carries the faint aroma of lentils and leeks cooking over a distant fire. There's a hush here, not from absence, but from intention. Everyone is busy with something, the quiet kind of busy, that doesn't demand attention, only presence. A child runs past with a small bundle of herbs wrapped in cloth. An old woman leans from a window, lowering a basket on a rope towards someone below. The basket bumps gently against the wall. Then a hand reaches up and plucks it down. Jesus walks slowly, glancing from door to door as though each one might speak. You imagine each doorway holding a story, a memory, or a moment of rest. He pauses at a home set, slightly back from the others. Its entryway is swept clean. A small clay jar of wildflowers sitting on a ledge beside the door. A woman steps out, holding a wide, shallow bowl. Steam curls gently from its surface. She sees Jesus and smiles. "Still walking?" she asks. He nods, then gestures to the bowl. "And you're still baking?" She laughs. "Someone has to feed the sun." She lifts the bowl slightly and disappears inside. Mainstream historical fact. In 1st century Judea, baking was often done in communal ovens or by heating clay bowls over fire pits. Women carried uncooked dough to shared spaces where fuel was conserved and stories were exchanged during the wait. Jesus continues on, and you follow. A group of boys crouches near a fig tree, flicking small stones toward a line etched in the dirt. One of them notices Jesus and suddenly straightens up. "Rabbi," the boy says respectfully. Jesus kneels beside them. "What's the game?" The boy explains each stone must land past the line, but not too far, or you lose your turn. "And what do you win?" Jesus asks. The boy shrugs. "You get to go first next time." Jesus smiles. Sometimes that's enough. A quirky cultural detail. Children's games in ancient Judea were simple but layered with meaning. Many mimicked adult tasks: harvesting, fishing, measuring, teaching coordination, fairness, and patience. It wasn't unusual for games to last all afternoon, judged by spectators with knowing smiles. The game resumes as you move on, and you hear laughter follow behind you like a trail of light. The houses become fewer now, and the path widens again. It curves around a rise where a single olive tree stands, bent slightly from wind but sturdied roots like fingers wrapped in the earth. A stone bench rests in its shade. Jesus sits, brushing a few leaves aside before leaning back. You join him, letting your body settle into the stone's curve. "I used to come here," he says. "Years ago." The tree sways gently overhead. "For quiet?" you ask. He shakes his head. 4 questions. You understand without needing to ask more. Historians still wonder how many of Jesus' teachings were shaped not in synagogues, but in silent places like this beneath a tree, beside a stone, with only wind for audience. Was wisdom first formed in listening, before it was ever spoken aloud? You rest your hands in your lap and look out at the horizon. A farmer leads 2 donkeys down a nearby path, their steps slow, their burden light. The farmer calls gently to them, using words that sound like lullabies more than commands. Behind you, a fig drops from the tree with a soft thump. Jesus reaches for it and splits it open with his thumbs. The inside is pink and glistening, filled with tiny seeds and soft sweetness. He offers you half. You eat slowly, the flavor rich and grounding. Nearby, bees drift lazily in and out of a crack in the stone, disappearing into shadow. Their hum is rhythmic, steady like breath, or memory, or prayer. Jesus watches them. They never hurry, he says, but everything gets done. You stay there a while longer, sharing silence and sun. The world feels full, but not loud, alive, but not rushed. Then, faintly, from farther down the hill, you hear the sound of singing, a woman's voice, rising and falling with a cadence older than language. You can't make out the words, but you feel their shape rounded, comforting, stitched with rhythm and dusk. Jesus stands. You do. The light has shifted now, slanting into that golden hue that makes every surface glow. The dust in the air turns soft and holy, suspended between moments. As you walk down the hill again, you pass a narrow alley. In it, a man repairs a broken jar. He's seated on a low stool, brush in hand, carefully applying resin to the fractured edge. The jar is chipped and stained, but he treats it with the care one might give a sacred object. Jesus slows and watches. The man doesn't look up, but says, "Not everything breaks clean." Jesus responds, "And not everything clean stays whole." The 2 of them nod, a wordless exchange, a quirky cultural detail. Some Judean potters believed that jars repaired with care held deeper blessing. A restored vessel was a sign of humility, proof that what once held water could still do so, even after cracks had formed. You move on, your eyes catching the subtle shine of resin in the fading light. The town is settling. Doors are closing, voices dimming, smoke curling up into the deepening blue. You and Jesus continue, walking not toward anything urgent but simply walking, as if each step is an act of peace. The sun begins its descent behind the far hills, casting long shadows across the stones beneath your feet. You and Jesus walk slowly, not out of weariness, but because the pace matches the world around you. There's a kind of hush settling over the town, like the air is exhaling at the end of a long, faithful day. A boy with a bundle of kindling nods at Jesus as his tunic is patched, and his arms are dusty, but there's a quiet pride in his task. He turns the corner toward his family's hearth, trailing the smell of dry wood and sun-warmed earth. You pause before a small open courtyard where a group of women gathers near a low stone basin. One is washing herbs, swishing them gently through water. Another grinds something in a small bowl with a pestle garlic, maybe, or dried lentils. Their laughter is hushed but warm, rising and falling like the rhythm of the tasks they share. Jesus stands a little apart, respectful of their circle, but one of the women notices and calls out, "Too late for the market." He smiles. Just in time for the stories. They laugh again, and she waves him closer. Mainstream historical fact. In Judean towns, evening was a time for shared chores: grinding grain, drawing water, lighting lamps. Women often worked together in courtyards or rooftop spaces, where tasks blurred into conversation, an oral tradition passed from hand to hand like bread. One of the younger women beckons you to sit. She offers a round clay tray with slices of something yellow and savory: flatbread brushed with oil and scattered with wild thyme. You take a piece and thank her. The taste is earthy and familiar, a comfort folded into food. The light flickers gently from nearby lamps, just 2, one balanced on a shelf, the other hung from a bent iron hook in the wall. They glow like small suns in a world preparing for sleep. A quirky cultural detail. Some families in Galilee believed that the first lamp lit each evening should be done with intention or fun while reciting a short blessing or whispering a name. To light a flame was to welcome peace into the home. Jesus stoops and picks up a dropped fig leaf from the ground. He holds it between his fingers, turning it toward the light. "It's not much," he says, "but neither is a mustard seed." You'll remember his words from earlier, the smallest things growing tall enough for birds to nest. The courtyard quiets for a moment, as if the lamps are listened. He places the leaf gently beside the basin and looks up. "Did you ever think about becoming a builder again?" someone asks. Jesus considers this. "Sometimes," he answers, "especially when things break." He doesn't elaborate, but you sense the weight behind it. Historians still wonder how often Jesus returned to carpentry during his early ministry, whether his hands shaped timber alongside his teachings, whether his understanding of weight, balance, and grain informed the way he spoke of yokes, doors, and foundations. The youngest woman at the basin holds up a jar, tilting it to inspect a crack near the base. Jesus reaches out, steadying it. "You can line the inside," he suggests. "Clay and pitch. It won't carry wine anymore, but it'll hold olives." She nods, impressed. "I'll try that." The moment passes, soft as steam rising from warm bread. A mother enters the courtyard carrying a child, half asleep, thumb still pressed to her mouth. She sits and lays the child across her lap, rocking gently. The child shifts, but doesn't wake. The group begins to hum low, even tones, like the beginning of a lullaby. You don't know the melody, but it feels older than words. Jesus hums too. You sit back, your piece of bread nearly gone, and look up toward the strip of darkening sky visible beyond the clay walls. One by one, the stars begin to appear, not all at once, but like shy children peeking out from behind curtains. The hum fades. A jar is capped. A door closes gently. Someone brushes dust from the rim of the basin and stacks a few baskets in the corner. The courtyard is returning to its quiet shape. Jesus stands and thanks the women. They offer smiles in return, worn, real, lovely. You follow him out, back onto the lane where the shadows have deepened. There's a peace in your steps now, not because the road has grown easier, but because it's shared. The stars are brighter now, etched like tiny songs across the fabric of the sky. Jesus glances upward. "They'll guide the herdsmen home," he says, "same as they did for David." You think of the boy who became a king, the shepherd who watched the skies, the lineage that now walks beside you on dust and sandals. A breeze rustles through a row of hanging linens nearby, and the smell of lavender drifts between the homes. You breathe deeply. And just before you round the next corner, you hear the soft clink of a clay jar being filled, water trickling, hands steady, moonlight catching on the rim. The path narrows slightly, winding between two rows of flat-roofed homes. Above you, strings of drying herbs sway gently in the evening breeze. Sage thyme, maybe even a few curled leaves of fig or mint. The scent is calming, earthy, and deep. You pause and run your hand across the edge of a low wall, the plastered stone cool beneath your fingers. Jesus walks a few steps ahead, quiet again, as if listening, not to you, not even to the night, but to something older, deeper, the memory of this place, maybe, or the way silence speaks, if you let it. You reach a small terrace, where a single clay jar rests beside a low bench. The jar is half full of water, beaded with droplets. Someone has placed a folded cloth on the bench beside it, still slightly damp, a sign of welcome, or maybe a neighbor's favor returned. Jesus sits and you do the same. The bench creaks just enough to remind you that it has held many before you. Maybe others seeking rest. Maybe others who asked the same quiet questions you carry now. Mainstream historical fact. In many Judean towns, water jars were shared between neighbors left out near benches or doorways as a gesture of hospitality, especially for travelers or those who had no well of their own. It was an unspoken kindness woven into the fabric of village life. Jesus reaches for the cloth, wrings it slowly, and presses it against the back of his neck. You follow suit, dabbing your wrists and brow. The coolness seeps into your skin, loosening something you hadn't realized was tense, a quirky cultural detail. In Galilean homes, certain clothes were designated for cooling, not for cleaning. They were soaked, folded, and kept in shaded corners for midday or evening use. Some families embroidered small symbols into the corners of these cloths to mark their used drops of blue thread for water, gold for heat, green for healing. You glance at the cloth now and notice 3 tiny stitches, barely visible but purposeful. Jesus nods toward the jar. That came from Tamar's cistern, he says. Runs deeper than the others. Holds the cold longer. He doesn't elaborate on how he knows, but you trust him. You drink, and it's true, the water's cool, almost sweet, as if it's held some secret from the earth and offered it now, in gentleness. Do you remember every well? You ask. Caesar tilts his head. Not every one, he says, but I remember who drew from them. You sit in silence for a time, the weight of the words like smooth stones placed gently in your hands. A young boy runs past the terrace, his sandals kicking up dust, a wooden hoop clattering ahead of him. He doesn't stop, but he waves once at Jesus before disappearing down the alley. A soft laugh escapes Jesus's lips. Still chasing that hoop, he murmurs. You smile. Was it yours? Whence he shrugs. Could have been. Historians still wonder how often Jesus returned to towns like this, whether he visited old neighbors in secret, whether he passed through familiar lanes without announcement. Some accounts suggest he traveled more widely than recorded, slipping through places without fanfare, carrying only what he'd always carried: presence and a kind of quiet clarity. A dog barks twice in the distance, and then the night stills again. The stars above have multiplied now, a scattered brilliance across indigo velvet. Jesus stands and lifts the jar, pouring a little water over the bench, washing away the dust. Then he sets it gently back where it was, cloth folded beside it. You rise, and together you walk once more. A breeze picks up, and with it the smell of baked clay and faint wood. The sound of a flute echoes somewhere, a broken melody dancing between walls. As you round the corner, you pass a home where a woman sits cross-legged beside a basket of figs. She's slicing them one by one, placing the pieces in a shallow bowl, her hands deft and unhurried. They'll dry by morning, she says without looking up. He nods. The sweetness will keep. She glances up now and smiles. So will the memory. The bowl rests on her knee, full of soft, pink interiors, glinting like jewels. You watch her work and wonder how many times she's done this, how many baskets, how many harvests, how many nights with stars like these overhead. She hums as she works. Jesus leans slightly and adds, "Tell Tamar the water is still sweet." She nods once, then goes back to slicing. Another turn, and you find yourself near the edge of the town again, where the homes give way to terraces and open paths. A few lamps remain lit behind shutters. The rest have dimmed, leaving only the silver glow of moonlight to guide your steps. You glance back at the tonnet's rooftop, soft. Its sounds now only whispers. Jesus pauses and looks too. "Do you miss it?" you ask. He takes a breath. "Not miss," he says, "but remember every stone." And you realize he's not speaking in metaphor. He remembers the stones, the jars, the claws, the benches, the fig slissers, the water carriers. He remembers the bones of this town as if they were his own, and maybe they are. You and Jesus walk in silence as the edge of the village falls behind. The path dips slightly, winding past a row of date palms, their long fronds rustling gently in the night air. The stars above shimmer like flecks of hammered gold, scattered without pattern, but somehow perfect in their placement. You step around a smooth stone, then another. The soil here is thinner, darker, a little moist from some underground spring that hasn't broken the surface but still nourishes from below. Ahead, nestled near the curve of a slope, stands a small outdoor oven round, its dome still holding a faint shimmer of heat from the day's baking. Beside it, a low table of sun-bleached wood rests beneath a lean-to of woven branches. On the table, a sack of flour, a small ceramic bowl with oil, and a folded cloth stained by long use. Jesus walks to the table and lifts the bowl slightly, tilting it to catch the starlight. The oil clings to the sides, thick and golden. "You baked here?" you ask. He smiles. Orphan. Mainstream historical fact. In many Galilean towns, communal ovens served whole clusters of families. Women brought kneaded loaves wrapped in cloth to bake one after another, often sharing firewood, ash space, and stories while they worked. Jesus steps around the oven and places a hand flat on its outer wall. He closes his eyes for a moment, as though reading its warmth, its memories. You can almost hear Echo's laughter, kneading, wood cracking in the fire. He lifts the sack of flour, feeling its weight. "Enough for tomorrow," he says. You imagine the rhythm of it all. Rise before dawn, knead as the lamps still flicker, walk barefoot to the oven, share heat with neighbors, return with warm bread wrapped in linen. A loop of life, a sacred routine, a quirky cultural detail. Some bakers in these villages stamp their loaves with carved wooden seals. Small symbols pass through families: a palm leaf, a star, a shepherd's crook. These weren't for decoration alone, but to mark whose loaf was whose, especially when baked communally. You ask him, "Did your family have a stamp?" He nods. A small fish, just one line for the tale. You look at the table, half expecting the stamp to be there. Jesus picks up a folded cloth, brushes it off, then spreads it over the wood. "Do you want to shape one?" he asks. You hesitate, then nod. He scoops flour into the bowl, adds water from a small jar beside the oven, and begins to stir. The dough forms slowly, thickening with each turn. You kneel and join him, your hands moving beside his clumsy. The clay bowl is cool to the touch, its rim slightly chipped. The smell of oil and flour rises gently. Historians still wonder whether Jesus' parables of leaven and dough came from moments like Disney's in dust. Fingers sticky, silence filled with work and warmth. Not allegory, but memory. Not sermon, but story. You shape a rough loaf together, its sides uneven, its top craggy. He looks at it and smiles. Perfect. You place it on the table, letting it rest. The oven's heat still radiates outward, enough to cradle the dough gently in warmth. You sit back on your heels, rubbing your hands clean on a worn piece of cloth. Jesus gazes up. The stars have shifted. The plow now leans a little westward, just as he said before. A fig bat flits overhead, wings silent against the sky. You listen to the sounds around you, the soft sigh of the breeze, the distant hoot of an owl, the faint crackle of the oven wall, cooling. It's as if the whole world has leaned in, just to rest with you for a moment. Jesus speaks, voice low. "There's something holy in waiting," he says. You nod, though you hadn't thought of it like that. He lifts the dough again, gently, reverently, and slides it into the mouth of the oven with a smooth, practiced motion. You both sit by the fire now, the glow flickering against your faces. No need for stories or miracles, just this, the waiting, the warmth, the hope that it rises. A moment later, you hear footsteps. A young woman appears, carrying a second loaf, shaped with more care than yours, its top marked with a sun. She sees Jesus, smiles, and nods. He nods back. Wordlessly, she slides her loaf beside yours in the oven, then sits nearby, folding her hands in her lap. 3 of you now, watching fire, smelling bread, no talking, just presence. The wind picks up, carrying the scent of herbs, rosemary, maybe, or bay. Jesus turns slightly toward you. You'll remember this. You believe him. The woman rises first. Her loaf is done. She lifts it gently, wraps it in a cloth, and disappears again into the night, leaving only the trace of baked air and quiet blessing. Jesus checks the last loaf. It has risen, split gently along the top, browned in places, soft in others. He lifts it with care and offers it to you. Still warm, still whole. You hold it in both hands, not sure if you should eat it or simply breathe it in. And as you stand again, bread in hand, you feel at how even the most ordinary things, when touched with care and shared with stillness, become sacred. You carry the warm loaf in both hands as you and Jesus step away from the oven, your feet soft against the packed earth part. The bread is fragrant, nutty, rich, touched with something ancient. It rests in your palms like something alive, something earned. The night has deepened. Shadows stretch long and soft, dissolving into the edges of the village. A few stars twinkle low near the horizon, and the air smells faintly of ash and fennel. You pass a pile of woven baskets, leaning near a doorway, their rims dusted with flour and chaff. Jesus walks beside you in silence, his pace You feel the weight of the day settle into your bones, not as burden but as presence. Ahead, a short wall made of sun-baked stone curves around a well-round, wide-mouthed, its surface worn by years of calloused hands and clay jars lowered with care. A leather bucket rests at the edge, its strap looped loosely around a peg. Jesus approaches it and unwinds the strap. He lowers the bucket slowly, the rope sliding over the edge with a soft rasp. A moment later, there's the sound of water touching wood hollow. Ancient, grounding, mainstream historical fact. Public wells were the center of village life in Judea. Families visited them at dawn and dusk to avoid the midday heat. and many of the region's deepest conversations between neighbors, travelers, and even prophets began beside water. You sit on the edge, setting the bread beside you. Jesus lifts the bucket, now heavy with water, and sets it between you both. From a small clay cup tucked into the stones, he pours 2 dips. He drinks first, then passes it to you. The water is cool and faintly sweet. It tastes of earth and time and something else, maybe memory. He leans back slightly, looking toward the quiet homes around you. There's something about water at night, he says. It listens differently, a quirky cultural detail. Some believe that wishes spoken beside night wells were more likely to travel carried by water down into the earth and up into heaven. Children whispered hopes into the dark ripples. Elders murmured names of the sick, the unborn, the departed. You glance into the bucket. The surface is still now, reflecting a crooked fragment of moon and a single drifting cloud. You ask, "Did you ever whisper to it?" Jesus pauses, then nods. "I think I still do." You smile, imagining it. Young Jesus, knees dusty, face solemn, murmuring into the dark well, not asking for miracles, just sharing. He dips the cup again and pours a small stream into the dust beside the well. "For Tamar's vines," he says. You mimic him, pouring a stream for the child at the oven. You add. He nods. Historians still wonder how much of Jesus' early life was shaped by these just so small rituals of care, unrecorded in scrolls but written deeply into the rhythms of his village. Not doctrine, but devotion. Not law, but love. The well is quiet now. You take the bread again, cradling it as you walk toward the low bench near the well's edge. Jesus sits beside you, his elbows resting on his knees, gaze distant. A gentle breeze stirs the hem of his cloak. From behind a nearby window comes the faint sound of a lullaby minor key. Old words, the kind that need no understanding to carry meaning. You break the loaf gently, steam rising in thin threads. Jesus takes a piece, his fingers brushing yours. You eat in silence. The bread is coarse, slightly burnt on one side, but satisfying. "There was a woman," he says softly, "who once made loaves shaped like doves." You turn to him. "She said it helped the children eat." He continues. "They didn't want to hurt them, so they'd nibble the wings first. Then He smiles at the memory, and you both laugh quietly. You imagine it. Again, kitchen fires, dough shaped by loving hands, small boys chewing dove-shaped crusts with reverence. Jesus stands, brushing crumbs from his sash. "Come," he says. Not as a command, but as an invitation. You follow him along a narrow lane that bends between 2 homes. The stone walls are smooth with age, their corners rounded by weather and touch. Overhead, a canopy of drying herbs hangs from a rope time, sage, and strips of fig bark tied in careful bundles. You pass beneath, their scent catching in your breath. The lane opens into a small courtyard, a garden of sorts. A fig tree leans against the back wall, and beside it, a clay jug rests half filled with rainwater. A moth dances above it, wings catching moonlight in flashes. Jesus crouches near the jug and places a hand on the ground. "Still warm," he says. The sun remembers. You kneel beside him. The earth here is softer. A line of footprints crosses the soil, each one shallow but clear. "They came barefoot," he murmurs, "to let the earth feel them." You don't ask who. You just listen. The village breathes around you still, slow, filled with the kind of silence that needs no fixing. You place your hand on the ground and for a long moment, you feel it. The pulse beneath the dust, the shared breath of roots and sky, the echo of every step walked in kindness. You rise again, and the jug's mouth catches a breeze, humming softly. Jesus turns, and you both begin to walk again. Bread shared, water tasted, night deepening, and as you move forward through the quiet, you feel the story stretch with you not ending, not even pausing, just unfolding. The path now curves around the outer edge of the village, where stone homes give way to open space, a slope, scattered with wild herbs and loose rock, looking down over groves of olive trees. You follow Jesus along this quieter trail, your steps soft by a carpet of fallen leaves and dust. Above, the sky has turned velvet dark, pierced by starlight that shimmers like scattered seeds. The moon, thin and curved, casts a pale wash over everything, lending the world a dreamlike glow. Jesus walks slightly ahead, one hand grazing the tops of dried fennel stalks. The plants sway with each touch, releasing their faint licorice scent into the cool air. You breathe deeply, letting the calm settle into your chest. Off to the side, a stone terrace wall rises, its top flat and worn smooth. Jesus hops up to sit on it, ankles crossed, face turned toward the hills beyond. You climb up beside him. Below, in the dim valley, you can just make out the outline of the morning market's remain stalls folded down, clay jars stacked neatly, baskets appended to keep away stray dogs. Mainstream historical fact. In Judean towns, marketplaces often doubled as social centers. At sunrise, these open areas filled with traders, gossip, children's laughter, and the low hum of bargaining. But by dusk, they fell silent, again emptied of voices but still echoing with life. You remember walking through there earlier, the smell of roasted chickpeas, the rattle of bead sellers, the bright cloths hung out for display. A boy had been trying to whistle through a flute made of hollowed reed. A woman with tired eyes had sold water from a wide-mouthed amphora. Jesus lifts his hand and points toward the now empty space. She gave water to 5 people before she sold a single drop, he says. You glance at him. Did you count? He shrugs, smiling. I watched. A quirky cultural detail. Some villagers believed that generosity at sunrise set the tone for the day. Vendors who shared freely in the morning were said to bring luck not just for themselves, but for the entire market square. You sit in silence for a while, your feet swinging slightly above the terrace slope. A night bird calls soft, unsure then quiets. The olive trees rustle like whispers passed between old friends. Then Jesus asks, do you ever feel like something is waiting? You tilt your head. What kind of something? He doesn't answer right away. Something quiet, he says finally. Something that isn't in a scroll or a sermon. Just waiting. You consider this. The feeling of being watched, not by eyes, but by meaning. Not threatened, but seen. Maybe, you say, maybe I feel it now. Historians still wonder whether Jesus' view of the sacred came from such moments. Not revelations on mountaintops, but ordinary nights like this, when the stars leaned low and the silence felt alive. Not the thunder, but the hush before it. Below, the clay jars remain where they were, stacked, rounded, calm, patient. You remember earlier when Jesus had stopped to examine one, turning it in his hands, running his fingers over the glaze like it held a story. He'd smiled then, quiet and almost proud. I helped shape one of those, he had said. He had asked which. They all hold water, he replied. Does it matter which hands made which? The question still lingers now as you sit beside him. Do you miss shaping them? You ask. Jesus leans back on his palms. Sometimes, but people are vessels too. You blink, then smile. It makes sense. He swings himself down from the wall, landing lightly. Come on, he says. I want to show you something. You follow him down a narrow goat path that winds behind the last homes of the village. It's less used, and your sandals crunch softly against dry twigs and soil. The air here is colder, and the moonlight struggles to reach between the fig trees leaning in from both sides. Eventually, the path opens onto a small clearing-ear kind of grove, hidden and crescent-shaped, with a central stone that's been worn into a natural seat. Beside it sits a low platform of earth, ringed with smooth pebbles. In the center, a bundle of broken reeds tied with red twine. Jesus kneels and touches the bundle. A child's shrine, he says. You don't speak. The air feels thick with meaning. Mainstream historical fact. In some Galilean communities, children would build secret shrines from found objects, tokens of hopes, fears, or things they wished to remember. These weren't formal altars, but quiet spaces of meaning, often shared only among friends. Jesus turns to you. I used to build these too. You sit beside him, brushing dust from the stone bench. He adds, mine always had stones in them. Small, round ones. One for every time someone taught me something. You look again at the pebbles surrounding the shrine. There's 12, you say. He nods. A good number, he whispers, even if they don't know why. The wind shifts again, cooler now, with the edge of night pushing into dawn. You feel your own breath slow, steadying to the rhythm of the trees. Historians still wonder whether moments like this, sitting in childhood groves, watching the quiet grow heavy with sky-shaped, the way Jesus understood belonging. Not just to people, but to place, to soil, to silence. You lean back, looking upward. The stars are still bright, but a faint light is beginning to rise at the eastern edge of the world. A gentle blue, like breath, returned. Jesus stands, and you do too. You leave the shrine untouched. As you walk away, you glance back once, and somehow, you know it will still be there tomorrow. Where you follow Jesus back through the winding paths, this time cutting through a narrow alley between low homes whose walls are mottled with the texture of packed mud and straw. The night has deepened, but it's not heavy. The moon still shines faintly above, but it's the scent of bread rising that leads your steps. From an open window, the warm aroma drifts out, word earthy, rich, familiar. You pause, drawn to the glow of a small oven fire inside. A woman, her sleeves rolled and her forehead damp with heat, kneads dough on a stone slab, her hands rhythmic and sure. Jesus stops with you and watches in silence. Mainstream historical fact. Bread was the cornerstone of daily life in Judea. Women typically baked each day, often using communal ovens or flat stones heated by embers. Dough was leavened by wild yeast or starter pass between households, living culture shared by neighbors and kin. A younger girl beside the woman pinches the dough into smaller rounds, dusting them with ground herbs from a shallow bowl. Time is up, maybe a bit of savory. She hums softly as she works, matching her pace to the rise and fall of the fire's glow. The woman catches your gaze and offers a small smile, then returns to her work. No words pass, but none are needed. Her hands speak fluently in the language of daily grace. Jesus leans slightly closer to the window and inhales deeply, closing his eyes. That smell, he whispers, you never forget it. A quirky cultural detail. Some Galilean children were given their first lessons in time not through sundials or stars, but by the rhythms of baking. When the bread's crust is golden, a mother might say, "Your father will be home." You both move on, leaving the window and its dancing firelight behind. The village is quieter now than it's been all day. Even the crickets seem to have slowed their song. You pass a clay jug left by someone's door, covered with a linen cloth. Its rounded shape reflects the moonlight like a silver drop. You don't touch it. It feels like it belongs to the peace of this moment. Jesus turns toward the well square, and you follow. The well sits at the center of the open space, its low stone wall worn smooth by generations of hands. The bucket rests beside it, the rope coiled loosely like a sleeping snake. You sit on the edge while Jesus dips his fingers into the bucket, letting the water cool his skin. Then he leans down, lifts a small handful to his lips, and drinks. The sound of it, the splash, the quiet swallow, the drip of what's left feels almost sacred in the hush. He holds the last drops in his palm and lets them fall to the earth beside the well. "To keep the ground honest," he says. You nod. Historians still wonder whether small gestures like this unspoken offerings were part of a greater spiritual rhythm that wove through daily life in ancient Judea. Were they prayers, or simply manners shaped by reverence? You rise, brushing dust from your robe, and follow Jesus into a garden path that runs behind the well square. Here, a few fig trees stand like watchful elders, their leaves fluttering with the breath of wind. One tree still holds fruit, and Jesus reaches up to touch it. Too early, he says, letting the fig go. But almost, the leaves cast shadows on his face, soft and moving, like the flicker of thoughts behind stillness. You sit beneath the fig tree, back against its trunk, and close your eyes. Your body remembers the road, the dust, the slow markets and folded bread, but your spirit feels quiet now, like the soil waiting beneath the seed. Jesus crouches nearby, hands drawing simple shapes in the dirt circles, waves, maybe a fish or a fig. Do you ever wish, you begin, that things could stay like this? He looks up. What do you mean, this peace, this quiet? Jesus doesn't answer right away. Then, it stays longer than you think. If you carry it, you smile. I'll try. A goat bleats softly in the distance. A door creaks once, then shuts. Somewhere above, the stars begin to fade, their shine dimming into the slow blush of dawn. Jesus stands, brushing soil from his fingers. "Come," he says, not urgently, but gently, as if to say, "We've rested. Now let's walk again." You rise, stretching your arms overhead. The night's cool has left your joints a little stiff, but your spirit feels light. Together, you return to the path that winds through the outer edge of the village. The homes are still dim, but one or two clay lamps flicker to life. Somewhere, a rooster crows, and then A soft clatter, the sound of a cartwheel over stone. The market is waking again. He glances at Jesus. I wonder if she's baking already, you say. He grins. She'd never really stopped. As the two of you round a corner, the scent of bread returns. Not the memory of it, but the real thing, warm, alive, unfolding into the morning, and the village exhales. You follow Jesus back toward the square, where the earliest market stirrings have begun to unfold. In the soft pre-dawn, the sky has turned a pale blue-gray, like old linen faded by sun and time. You pass a man laying out woven mats on the stone ground, his shoulders wrapped in a russet shawl against the morning chill. Beside him, a boy with tousled hair yawns as he carries a basket of dried lentils to one corner of the space. The smell of bread now mingles with the earthy scent of damp fabric and early dust. You hear a faint trickle of water, someone rinsing clay pots at a cistern just out of view. It's not busy yet, but the tempo is rising. Jesus watches it all in silence, his steps steady, almost reverent. Mainstream historical fact. Morning markets in first-century Judean towns often began before full daylight. Farmers, weavers, potters, and shepherds would bring goods to barter or sell. These open-air gatherings weren't only about commerce, they were also places of news, gossip, laughter, and quiet ritual. A woman in a teal headscarf arranges bunches of herbs onto a cloth, mint, and something spiky and yellow-flowered you don't recognize. Her fingers move with practiced ease, separating leaves, shaking dust, stacking stems. A clay pot at her feet holds damp reeds to keep the greens fresh a little longer. Jesus bends to admire the herbs. She has the best mint, a nearby man says, unprompted. He's older, barefoot, with a large water jar balanced on his hip. The herb seller looks up, smiling. That's because I sing to it. Jesus nods, as though this explains everything. The man chuckles. She sings to everything. She shrugs. It listens better than some people. A quirky cultural detail. In some parts of Galilee, herb sellers were known for their green tongues, a belief that talking gently to plants helped them grow stronger. Children were sometimes taught to whisper to sprigs before planting, passing secrets to the soil. You walk slowly past baskets of dried fish, coils of rope, clay jars painted in simple swirls of ochre and indigo. A potter unpacks his wares beneath a woven awning. Bowls, flasks, tiny oil lamps shaped like fish, birds, even a lion's paw. Jesus picks up a small cup and turns it in his hand. The potter, wiping his palms on a cloth, watches him with quiet pride. Kill fired just yesterday, he says. Jesus smiles, still warm. The potter blinks, unsure if he's joking, but Jesus places the cup back gently and offers a slight bow. You notice the way each person responds to him, not as if he's a famous teacher or a feared prophet, but like he's someone familiar, someone who once helped build a wall or shared figs during a drought, someone remembered. You sit for a moment beside a stack of baskets woven reeds, tightly bound. The vendor beside you sharpens a small blade on a stone, sparks flashing briefly in the air. Jesus joins you. You ask, have you ever sold anything here? He nods. Wooden bowls? And once a bet, did it sell? He grins. Eventually, a breeze rolls through the square, lifting specks of dust and the hem of a sleeping cloth strung between two posts. A rooster crows again, this time nearer. More people are arriving now, women with jars, boys carrying bundles of straw, an old man pulling a reluctant goat by the horn. Historians still wonder how much Jesus' early years in towns like this shaped his understanding of value. Not value in coin, but in labor, in patience, in things worn smooth by hands and time. His metaphors often turned to such things east, nets, lamps, not because they were poetic, but because they were familiar. You'll rise again, trailing behind Jesus as he heads toward the far side of the square. Here, a stall shaded with palm fronds offers jars all round, some glazed, most unpainted. The vendor leans against one, rubbing sleep from his eyes. Jesus examines one with a narrow mouth and a smooth lip. For water? He asks. For wine? The vendor replies, but water works, too. That one holds a day's draw for 2 people. More if you don't mind sharing. Jesus turns to you. What do you think? You lift the jar slightly. It's heavier than it looks. Cool against your palm. It's solid. You say balanced. Jesus places a coin in the vendor's hand, then lifts the jar into the crook of his arm. You follow him back through the thickening crowd. Someone calls his name brief, casual, and he raises a hand in greeting without turning. The jar reflects slivers of early sun, and it's suddenly easy to picture this man not as a teacher or healer, but simply as one of many, a worker, a walker, a buyer of jars. He sets the vessel near the edge of the square, beside a well. Then he removes the stopper and tips it gently, letting a small stream of water pool into a waiting bowl. You watch as he cups some into his palm, offering it to a passing child without a word. The boy drinks, then runs off. You and Jesus remain by the jar as morning finally blooms in full, lights touching the tops of the rooftops, the hum of the market at its peak, and the day begins again exactly as it has, and yet not quite the same. The warmth of the day is rising now, not harsh yet, but promising to settle deep into the stone and soil. You and Jesus linger by the well, the water jar beside you catching a glint of sun. Around you, the market flows with low voices, purposeful feet, and the small music of coins clinking into cloth. A pair of girls walks past, balancing shallow baskets of flatbread wrapped in linen. They giggle behind their hands as they pass Jesus. He smiles but doesn't interrupt their hush of laughter. A man nearby rearranges his crates of figs and pomegranates, brushing away a curious goat with a playful nudge. "Not for you, old friend," he mutters, flicking his fingers toward the animal's nose. Jesus watches the goat more than the fruit, his eyes tracing the gentle tilt of its ears, the careworn curve of its back. Mainstream historical fact. In Judean towns, goats and chickens roamed freely through market squares, often known by name to locals. Goats were prized not only for milk, but for their role in turning refuse and weeds into something useful fertilizer for heavy soils. Jesus turns to you and gestures toward the fig vendor. "Should we?" You nod, and he leads the way. The vendor greets him with a palm over heart. "You're early, or you're late," Jesus replies, gently. The man laughs and begins placing figs into a folded cloth. The best are near the bottom. Jesus picks one from the top and bites, juice rising instantly along his lip. You do the same sweetness with just a whisper of grainy grit. The man leans against his stall. "Tell me something, Rabbi." Jesus tilts his head, still chewing. "You think figs ever get tired of being the lesson?" Jesus wipes his hands and says, "Not if they're sweet enough." A quirky cultural detail. It was common for people to speak in light jest to wandering teachers, probing with humor more than challenge. The market was a place not only of buying and selling, but of shared sayings and passed down riddles. Children learned to play with words here before they could read a scroll. You both sit briefly on a low wall beside the bread seller's stall. She's a wide-shouldered woman with flour on her sleeves and laugh lines deep enough to tell their own stories. She's wrapping loaves in coarse linen, humming something under her breath. "Left early this morning," she says, without looking up. "I was hungry," Jesus answers. She snorts. "You were always hungry." Jesus laughs, really laughs. A soft shoulder-shaking sound that you rarely hear in its full form. It's warm enough to draw a few turned heads. The woman passes him a small heel of bread. It's from yesterday, but it remembers how to be good. Jesus breaks it, hands you a piece. You chew together in easy silence. Historians still wonder how much of Jesus' wisdom was shaped in exchanges like these, informal, dusty, deeply human. Was the kingdom of heaven shaped more by temple scrolls, or by the weight of a fig in the hand? By prophecy, or by bread passed between friends? The market stretches around you now, busy and blooming. Children chase a rolled reed mat down a gentle slope, shrieking with glee. A woman balances a jar on her head while her toddler waddles beside her, clutching her sleeve. A song rises from somewhere, someone selling dyes, their melody lilting like the wind. You catch a whisper of saffron, a streak of indigo. Jesus nudges you, nodding toward the basket weaver's stall. "Come." You follow? The weaver is trimming a reed when you arrive. His hands are thick-fingered, deeply creased, but move with an almost musical precision. Around him, baskets of all sizes, from fingertip bowls to ones large enough to cradle a child. Jesus crouches beside him, watching the hands work. "Reeds from the Jordan?" he asks. "And a few from the wells near Cana," the man replies. Jesus picks up a small bowl, inspects its curve. "Do they ever crack?" The man shrugs. "Only when rushed." Jesus nods. "Like hearts, then." The weaver glances up sharply, then smiles. You sit, feeling the warm hum of life all around. The shuffle of sandals, the hum of quiet work, the rising sun pressing gently against the back of your neck. A rooster clucks and struts through the square, oblivious to its own drama. The market is now a living thing, breathing, shifting. You notice a young boy watching Jesus from behind a column, his eyes wide, his hands gripping a half-eaten date. When Jesus looks his way, the boy darts off, but not far, just to a place where he can still see. Jesus murmurs, "Even the smallest ones see." You think of mustard seeds, of leaven in dough, of children listening when no one thinks they are. You glance around the market, every stall, every vendor, every passerby caught in some quiet rhythm of trust and repetition. The same pots, the same hands, the same questions. Yet somehow, it feels sacred. A breath of wind stirs the edge of your robe. The clay jar you purchased earlier is still nearby, now warm from the sun. Jesus says, almost absently, the day isn't over, but it's becoming itself. And in that strange, lovely way he speaks, you know exactly what he means. You leave the market with Jesus beside you, the path ahead winding gently past smaller homes and quiet courtyards. The clay jar swings lightly in your hand, still warm from the morning sun. The market noise fades behind you, just the occasional voice rising, a goat braying faintly, the distant sound of a flute. The street you walk is narrower here. Stone walls lean close. A vine spills over a low fence, casting delicate shadows on the ground. Jesus slows his pace, letting his hand brush a patch of soft moss growing at the base of a cracked wall. You glance upward and catch sight of a linen curtain fluttering in a high window. Behind it, a pair of eyes watching, then gone. Jesus speaks slow. Everyone sees, even in silence. Mainstream historical fact. In Judean villages, windows were small slits in the stone, often placed high for ventilation and privacy. Much of village life played out just behind these curtained openings, watching, listening, remembering. You pass a small courtyard, where a man kneels beside a chipped water basin, rinsing a pair of sandals. He glances up and nods. His daughter, barely more than a toddler, sits nearby on a woven mat, banging two small wooden spoons together in clumsy rhythm. Jesus pauses to smile at her. The girl freezes, then offers a toothy grin. She has your timing, Jesus says to the man. Better than mine ever was, he replies. The girl resumes her spoon, clattering now with more purpose. You continue, and soon the sound of the spoons fades too. There's a stillness now, only the faint rush of wind through the alley and the soft scuff of your steps on packed earth. Jesus points to a pale yellow flower blooming in the cracks of the stone. No one planted it, he says, but it remembered how. You crouch beside it, touching the edge of a petal with your fingertip. It trembles slightly, as if startled by the attention, then stills again. A quirky cultural detail. In some Galilean communities, children were told stories about plants that grew without planting signs. They believed that someone had passed through with blessing in their footsteps. These visitors' flowers were cherished and never picked. Jesus rises and continues walking. You follow. Soon the alley opens into a shaded corner near the edge of the town. An old fig tree grows here, its branches thick and gnarled, heavy with early fruit. Beneath it, a worn stone bench cradles the curves of many visitors. A faded linen cloth lies folded on one side, as if someone had only just left. Jesus sits and rests his back against the trunk, eyes half closed. You join him. The clay jar rests beside your feet, nestled in a patch of cool dirt. He speaks without opening his eyes. There's a place not far from here, he says, where the jars are fired. You nod, remembering the kiln behind the potter's yard. I used to bring wood for it, he says, thornbush and olive prunings. Anything that would burn hot and steady. You imagine it. Jesus, younger, sweat on his brow, arms full of kindling, stacking branches in even rows. Quiet work, grounded work. He opens his eyes and turns to you. You ever see clay before it's ready? He asks. You'll shake your head. It fights, he says, twists, resists, cracks in the wrong places. But if the hands are patient and the fire is kind, it becomes what it was meant for. You sit with that thought. Historians still wonder how many trades Jesus knew beyond carpentry. How often he stepped into other work to help a neighbor. How many skills he quietly learned and carried without fanfare. Some suggest his metaphors reveal more than parable. They hint at first-hand memory. A breeze stirs the fig leaves above you, scattering shadow like a slow dance across the ground. One fruit drops softly beside the bench. Jesus picks it up, brushes it off, splits it with his thumbs. He hands you half. It's soft and warm and impossibly sweet. The kind of fruit that seems to hold sunlight in its flesh. He doesn't say anything. He doesn't need to. You chew in silence, letting the moment unfurl like a folded scroll. Beyond the fig tree, the edge of the town spills into open land. Fields beginning, roads curling into hills. The kind of place where footsteps go to wander. Jesus rises, brushing bark dust from his back. Let's see if the kiln's still warm, he says, and gestures ahead. You take the jar and follow him, the sunlight now mellowing into early afternoon gold. And though the road is dusty, your feet feel lighter somehow, like clay remembering its shape. The path to the kiln winds gently along the edge of the village, where the last stone homes give way to small terraces and rows of spindly olive trees. You and Jesus walk side by side again, the sun warming your shoulders but softened now by the slow arc of afternoon. The air smells faintly of ash and lavender, the dry scent of summer's end. Ahead, a low stone wall marks the boundary of the potter's yard. The kiln is set back into a rise in the earth, half shaded by an overhanging fig tree. Its chimney leans slightly, patched with reddish clay. Smoke no longer rises, but the ground near its mouth still pulses with a stored heat. Jesus steps lightly over the threshold, pausing to touch the kiln's rounded dome. Still warm, he says. Mainstream historical fact. In 1st century Judea, communal kilns were often used by many families in a village, each bringing their own claywares for firing. These ovens reached scorching temperatures through carefully stoked fires that lasted for hours, sometimes even days. You set the jar beside a row of fired bowls waiting to be collected. Their glaze shines in uneven hues, muted ochre, pale rust, a swirl of teal near the lip of one cup. Each piece feels both fragile and anchored, like something shaped from breath and intention. A woman approaches from behind the kiln, her sleeves rolled, a smear of white clay across her cheek. Looking for Tamar, she asks. Jesus shakes his head. Just remembering. She nods, then returns to her work, stacking pots into a shallow basket, checking each with a tap of her nail. Jesus walks to a nearby bench, one that has clearly survived its fair share of fires and feet. He sits with a slow exhale and looks out across the quiet yard. You join him, elbows on knees. There's a rhythm here you hadn't noticed before, wood clinking, feet brushing dust, the soft chime of ceramic cooling in the shade. A quirky cultural detail. In some towns, new pottery was briefly placed near doorways or shared wells, not just too cool, but as silent offerings, symbols of gratitude for the earth's yield and the hands that shaped it. Children would sometimes touch each pot for luck. Jesus picks up a shard from the ground, a piece of broken handle. He turns it slowly in his palm. Not all vessels survive the fire, he says. You look at the shard, its jagged edge, its smooth curve, and suddenly it seems more than debris. It's a lesson, maybe even a kind of prayer. He sets it back down. You both rise and walk the perimeter of the yard, passing rows of clay scoops, wide-mouthed jars, tiny cups meant for oil or honey. Some are flawless, others bear small imperfections, an uneven rim, a dimple where the thumb pressed too hard. Jesus runs his fingers along one. Even these, he says, still carry. Historians still wonder how literal Jesus' use of pottery imagery was when he spoke of vessels, of being shaped by the potter's hands. Was he quoting scripture or remembering the smell of fire and the weight of wet clay? You pause by a jug with a long, curved neck, its base darkened by fire marks. You imagine filling it with cool well water, lifting it to a friend's lips. The world feels simpler like this, built from useful things, worn by use, made by hands that understood time and trust. Jesus begins walking again, this time along the outer path that curves back toward the center of town. You follow without words, the clay jar now swinging lightly again in your grip. The warmth from the kiln has faded, but something of it lingers in the soles of your feet. At one bend in the path, you pass a boy carrying a smaller jug, too big for him. He stumbles a little. Jesus steps forward quickly, steadying him with a hand on the shoulder. Almost there, he says gently. The boy grins, nods, and keeps going. Jesus watches him for a moment longer, then turns back to you. There's something about carrying, he says. You only know the weight after a few steps. You nod, and the silence between you becomes a kind of understanding. Soon, the rooftops return to view, their familiar shapes welcoming you back. A woman sweeps dust from her doorstep with a bundle of reeds. A group of boys chase one another past a drying net. A man crouches, mending a broken sandal strap with quiet care. You and Jesus pass them all, the jar still whole, the path well-tread. As you near your home, the wind shifts, bringing with it the scent of baking, again flatbread and lentil stew, the anchors of evening. Jesus glances toward the lane you walked together that morning. Feels longer ago than it is, he murmurs. You smile. You feel it too. A whole day folded like warm bread between your palms, ordinary, sacred, complete. He slows at your threshold but doesn't stop. I'll see you tomorrow, he says. You nod, and somehow that feels like a promise. Night draws over the village like a soft veil, deepening from violet to indigo, settling into every crease of stone and shutter. The clay jar you carried all day now rests on a low shelf inside your home, its surface cool and still faintly scented with the kill. A single oil lamp burns beside it, its flicker echoing the rhythm of your breathing. You step out again, just for a moment, barefoot on the threshold. The packed earth feels different now, cooled from the day's heat, faintly damp with dew beginning to gather. The stars overhead are sharp and countless, each one a pinprick in the velvet dark. Jesus is nowhere in sight, but you still feel his presence like a quiet chord still humming in the room after the last note has been played. Mainstream historical fact. In many Judean towns, twilight marked the time for rest, prayer, or reflection. Families would gather for the evening meal, then sit together in gentle conversation or silence, listening to the night sounds and allowing the pace of life to slow. You light a second lamp and place it in the window. It's something your family always did, an old habit, part practical, part symbolic, a way of saying, someone is still awake here, someone is still watching. You think about the jar again, how simple it is, how many hands were part of its making, the digging, the shaping, the turning, the burning. You imagine how many such vessels exist in homes like yours across the countryside, used for water, oil, flour, salt. Jesus' words echo faintly in your mind. Even these still carry. You turn back inside and lay out the folded cloth he gave you. It still holds the faint imprint of herbs, the crease of his hands. You smooth it gently, not wanting to disturb its memory. A quirky cultural detail. It was common in Galilee to preserve certain cloths, kerchiefs, or prayer shawls not for their value, but because of who had worn or used them. Some were even stitched into the hems of children's garments for protection and remembrance. You sit again by the lamp, knees drawn in, arms wrapped around them. Outside, the village hums its final notes, low voices, a goat's shuffle, the hush of wind through a date palm. Someone coughs, a child sings softly, just the lullaby's tail end. You close your eyes. In your thoughts, you walk the market path again. You hear the coin jars rattle, smell the dried fish, the clay dust, the pomegranate skins. You see the woman pounding grain, the potter brushing slip across a drying cup, the boy chasing a dog past, hanging bundles of herbs. You see Jesus, always just ahead, always turning back to wait. Historians still wonder whether daily rhythms like the clay were shared bread shaped the way Jesus spoke of the kingdom of heaven, not as distant or dramatic, but near, familiar, woven into the fabric of what was already around them. You lie back onto your woven mat, the lamp now burning low beside you. Your fingers trace the edge of the cloth again. You wonder if tomorrow will be like today. You hope so. But even if it isn't, you know now that sacredness doesn't wait for perfect moments. It walks the dusty roads. It listens in crowded markets. It sits beside you on stone benches and waits with you at the end of the lane. You breathe in deeply, letting the coolness of night fill your lungs. And you sleep. The lamp dims until it flickers like a memory, then fades altogether. The room settles into shadow, warm and familiar, a stillness stitched through with distant lullabies and the breath of sleeping earth. Outside, fig leaves shiver faintly in the breeze. Somewhere far off, a nightbird calls and falls silent again. The village has gone quiet, but not forgotten. It holds the hush like cupped hands, offering it to the stars. The clay jar rests exactly where you left it, whole, ordinary, sacred. Your body unwinds slowly, each breath longer than the last. Your shoulders loosen, your fingers grow still, and the dust of the day gently slips away. There is nothing more to do, nowhere else to be. Just this moment, this quiet, this peace. The warmth of bread still lingers on your tongue, the scent of time in your memory, and somewhere perhaps within, or just beyond, the echo of the voice that spoke, not with thunder, but with presence. You only know the weight after a few steps. You've taken those steps. Now, you rest. Let the stars keep their watch. Let the wind tell its slow stories through olive branches. Let morning arrive only when it's ready. Tonight, you are held by something vast and kind and eternal, and all is well.